tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome. We are going to each give some prepared remarks and then answer your questions. I will begin, followed by Minister Mendicino and then Minister Blair. Are we ready? Good morning. Good afternoon. Bonjour. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I want to provide you with a brief update, provide Canadians with a brief update on where we are in the process of implementing the public order emergency declared under the Emergencies Act. La raison pour laquelle nous avons recours à la loi sur les mesures d'urgence est évidente pour quiconque fréquente le centre-ville d'Ottawa ou essaie de traverser une frontière Canada-États-Unis dans plusieurs provinces. L'occupation et les barricades illégales auxquelles nous devons faire face sont sans précédent. Je l'ai dit lundi et je le répète, le Canada est un État de la primauté de droit et déclarer l'état d'urgence respecte la loi. The Emergencies Act spells out a clear process that must be followed once an emergency is declared. Yesterday, the orders and regulations that allow us to take action were published in the Canada Gazette. They outline in specific terms our clear, targeted, and proportionate response to this crisis. As the Emergencies Act stipulates, the orders and regulations made yesterday must be tabled in the House of Commons within 2 days of their release. That will happen before the end of the day tomorrow. Looking ahead, both the House of Commons and Senate will soon have the opportunity to debate and vote on the emergency declaration. We are required to table the written declaration in both houses within 7 sitting days. As well, Parliament can amend or revoke any orders we have made. This is an important democratic check and balance in the Act. We will be moving quickly to commence debate. Canadians expect and deserve nothing less. La déclaration et les décrets qui en découlent sont temporaires. Les pouvoirs obtenus sous la déclaration expirent après 30 jours et nous espérons les révoquer plus tôt. Notre gouvernement comprend que beaucoup de Canadiens sont inquiets de l'impact de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence sur leurs droits. Je comprends votre inquiétude et je tiens à vous rassurer. La loi sur les mesures d'urgence n'est pas la loi sur les mesures de guerre. The Emergencies Act is much more limited in scope. It is allowing us to use targeted and proportional measures to help bring the illegal blockades and occupations to an end. And critically, all of our actions under the Emergencies Act will comply with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That requirement is built into the legislation itself. It is an important and necessary safeguard. Toutes les mesures prises en vertu de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence doivent respecter la Charte des droits et libertés. Canadians expect their government to act within the bounds of the Charter, and we will live up to that expectation. Thank you. Merci. I turn the microphone over to Minister Mendicino.
Merci, David. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining from the traditional territories of the Algonquin people. Thank you for joining us for today's update on the federal government's ongoing response to the illegal blockade. These illegal blockades pose a national security threat to our borders, our economy, and to the health and safety of all Canadians. To begin, I am pleased to report that 3 of the most important border crossings in Canada are now open to trade and travel. In Alberta, the Coutts border crossing reopened yesterday after the successful enforcement operation by the RCMP. In British Columbia, the Pacific Highway border crossing south of Surrey has also reopened after enforcement action, including 12 arrests. And in Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge, where roughly a quarter of Canada's daily commercial trade was blocked for almost a week, is now reopened. And in Manitoba, I can inform that the RCMP and CBSA are hoping to reopen the Emerson border crossing later today. This means that Alberta beef, BC salmon, and Manitoba pork can once again be exported to markets across North America. The successful work that is being done in Windsor by the police service there in conjunction with the RCMP and OPP to end the illegal blockade has resulted in some 50 arrests and 90 charges. This means that families in Windsor, Oakville, Ingersoll, Alliston, and so many other communities know that they will be able to go back to work in the morning and earn a paycheck. Trade is now flowing in both directions, and I'm pleased that factories across southern Ontario have resumed production. And as we know, the RCMP made 13 arrests earlier this week at the Coutts border crossing and seized a significant number of lethal firearms, a large supply of ammunition, body armor, high-capacity magazines, and a machete. And yesterday, 4 men were charged by the RCMP with a conspiracy to murder officers. As the Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP noted, and I quote, "Monday's weapons seizure and subsequent arrests speak to the serious criminal activities taking place during the protest and illegal blockades. The dangerous criminal activity occurring away from the TV cameras and social media posts was real and organized. It could have been deadly for citizens, protesters, and officers." We need to be clear-eyed about the seriousness of these incidents. Indeed, several of the individuals at Coutts have strong ties to a far-right extreme organization with leaders who are in Ottawa. We're talking about a group that is organized, agile, knowledgeable, and driven by an extremist ideology where might makes right. And this is completely contrary to our democratic values. On Monday, the government took the deliberate step of invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time in our country's history. The declaration gives targeted, temporary, and special authorities to law enforcement to help them. The powers exercised are intended to give law authorities new tools to not only bring down the blockades, but to prevent future similar ones and threats by maintaining security at our borders, legislatures, and other critical infrastructure. Compte tenu des paramètres de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, le gouvernement s'attend à ce que ces pouvoirs temporaires soient exercés par les forces de l'ordre de façon responsable, proportionnelle, de concert avec les autorités provinciales existantes et toujours dans le respect de la Charte. La déclaration et les décrets qui en découleront aideront la police et les autres autorités compétentes à mettre fin rapidement et de manière pacifique aux barrages illégaux et à maintenir ouverts les corridors essentiels. Ils aideront à mobiliser rapidement les services essentiels comme les dépanneuses, les barrières et d'autres équipements. La GRC peut être dépêchée plus rapidement pour faire respecter les lois locales et provinciales. De plus, la loi sur les mesures d'urgence donnera des pouvoirs temporaires aux banques et aux institutions financières afin d'arrêter le flux de produits et de devises qui pourraient être utilisés pour aider et encourager les blocages illégaux. Last night, we shared the orders which detail exactly how the Act will be implemented. In particular, it outlined how an individual must not participate in a public assembly that may be reasonably expected to lead to a breach of the peace. I'm pleased to say that earlier today, that local authorities here in Ottawa began to issue warnings under that provision. There are also provisions under the declaration that allows us to dispute the movement of people or trade interfering with critical infrastructure or supporting or threatening violence against people or property. Over the past 3 weeks, we have seen all of this and more on the streets of Ottawa and at major border crossings, and it must stop. This is a serious situation. We must resist the temptation to dismiss these as isolated incidents. At the core of the movement is anger, animosity, and in far too many cases, violence. We're seeing it play at our borders, in front of our legislatures, our national symbols, and in our communities and in our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, many residents in Ottawa have had the same experience. La situation dans la capitale nationale reste très grave. Et c'est exactement la raison pour laquelle nous avons pris l'importante mesure d'invoquer la loi sur les urgences. Depuis le début de cette situation, nous nous sommes engagés auprès des Canadiens à utiliser tous les outils à notre disposition pour les aider à retrouver leur vie. Comme je l'ai déjà dit, la situation au centre-ville d'Ottawa, surtout les fins de semaine, est tout simplement inacceptable. La loi sur les urgences donnera à la police des nouveaux pouvoirs d'application de la loi pour maîtriser la situation. To those who may be thinking to come to Ottawa this weekend, don't. At best, the residents of the city have made it clear that this is not the time. And at worst, you may be tying yourself to dangerous criminal activity. This has been an extraordinarily difficult 2 years for all Canadians, and everyone's mental health has suffered. But for those who've had their community occupied or can't go to work or can't live their lives, the past 3 weeks have been simply unacceptable, and it's unsustainable. We owe it to them and to all Canadians to end the illegal blockades and to help get Canadians' lives back. Thank you. Merci, and I will now turn it over to my colleague and friend, Minister Bill Blair.
Thank you very much, Minister Mendicino and Minister Lametti, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. As you have heard, on Monday, our government invoked the Emergency Act in order to supplement and support provincial and territorial authorities to address the ongoing blockades at a number of key border crossings across the country, as well as to help deal with the serious situation that we are seeing here in Ottawa. Let me acknowledge to you all that this is not a decision that we came to lightly. We recognize this is a very significant step that requires both caution and a tremendous amount of care. And let me assure everyone watching here today that the measures that we have brought forward are targeted, temporary, and proportionate to the threat that exists in our country. I listened very carefully to the leader of the NDP this morning, who asked that these measures be implemented with care and with consideration, and we agree. It is important as well for Canadians to recognize that the Emergency Act requires that every action be charter compliant and that at all times their rights and freedoms will be respected. Additionally, everything that is being done through this Act is subject to parliamentary oversight and to review. These measures were only invoked after exhausting all other options, and it is our very sincere hope that we will be able to lift them as quickly as possible. We did this in order to keep Canadians safe, to protect our economy, to restore confidence in and sustain our institutions, and to ensure the safety of our citizens. I'd like to take the opportunity to recognize the work of the Windsor Police and the Ontario Provincial Police and other police services across Ontario, as well as, of course, the RCMP, in reopening and securing the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. The same can be said for the extraordinary and important work of the RCMP at the Coutts border crossing in Alberta, the Pacific Highway border crossing in British Columbia, and in Emerson, Manitoba. But we have also seen strong evidence that it was the intention of those who blockaded our ports of entry in a largely foreign-funded, targeted, and coordinated attack, which was clearly and criminally intended to harm Canada, to harm Canadians, to interrupt vital supply lines, to idle our workers and close our factories. And it demanded that we all do what was required in order to restore this integrity and security of our borders and to protect Canadian interests. While we thank, quite sincerely, those law enforcers and our provincial and territorial partners who have worked hard to this, let me also state unequivocally, we respect provincial authority over policing in their jurisdictions. but I believe all Canadians also recognize that the Government of Canada has a responsibility to protect the safety and security of our international borders, to ensure that Canadian interests are addressed, and we will do what is required to protect our country. I'd also note that since the the announcement of the measures we intended to take and have now taken through the gazetting of these measures, we've seen significant progress. We saw, for example, excellent and important enforcement conducted by the RCMP in Coutts, Alberta, where, as Minister Mendicino has indicated, a large number of weapons have been seized and people have now been charged with serious criminal offenses directed towards our law enforcement officers. But we've also seen that the acknowledgement and recognition by many of the people at those protests in Coutts, in Emerson, in British Columbia, when they realized that their activities would come under greater financial scrutiny and consequence, they have done what rational people would do, and they are beginning to leave and open those borders. We are achieving what we intended to achieve with these measures, and we're doing it in the most proportionate and measured way possible. With commercial vehicles now traveling unimpeded through these ports of entry, grocery store shelves are being stocked, factories and businesses are receiving parts and supplies they need, and most importantly, hard-working Canadians are able to get back to work. In Ottawa, I want to acknowledge that we are seeing progress in the effort to end the unlawful occupation that has had a devastating impact on residents for nearly 3 weeks. Yesterday, Acting Chief Stephen Bell confirmed that the Ottawa Police Service has the resources in partnership with the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP and other police services from across Ontario. And as well, they now have the authorities of both the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario to end the illegal demonstration that has disrupted the City of Ottawa for far too long. We will provide support to our law enforcement officials to restore the rule of law and a safer environment for the people of Ottawa. As of this morning, the Ottawa Police Service has been serving notice to individuals who are blocking Wellington Street to remind them that illegal behavior that they are engaging in will have consequences and our laws will be enforced. We will continue to support our law enforcement partners, our municipal and provincial partners, as they work together through the Integrated Command Centre to restore order to our community and to uphold our laws. These illegal blockades have shown us that our supply chains are fragile, and when attacked in a coordinated and concerted effort, we must respond, and we must respond with resolve and with strength. We cannot leave anyone with the impression that our democracy is negotiable or subject to efforts of appeasement. Canada is a strong and democratic nation. We will not let any foreign entities that seek to do harm to Canada or to Canadians erode trust in our democratic institutions or question the legitimacy of our democracy. And as Minister Lametti stated on Monday, Canada is a rule of law country, and by declaring a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act, we are following the law and we are acting within it. Thank you very much for listening to our remarks. I would now open it up to any questions you may have.
So we'll start with questions in the room. Commençons avec 3 questions dans la salle, suivi des questions sur la plateforme Zoom, followed by Zoom question. Mike 1.
Bonjour, oui, merci. Bonjour, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. Question pour M. Mendocino, M. Lametti. Dans la justification pour la loi, on dit qu'il y a des perturbations économiques, surtout à la frontière. Maintenant que les frontières sont plus bloquées, est-ce que vous avez encore besoin de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence? Et si oui, pourquoi?
Je peux commencer. Oui, merci pour la question. Le rationnel pour l'introduction de la loi des circonstances d'urgence était très clair et bien expliqué dans le document. Oui, vous avez des raisons. Il y a beaucoup de perturbations sur l'économie à les frontières. On avait fait beaucoup de progrès au cause de les efforts significatifs par les services, les forces de policières pendant les derniers quelques jours. Mais il faut garder ce progrès. Il y a des outils très concrets et pratiquement dans la loi d'urgence, des circonstances d'urgence qui peuvent aider les services de police, les forces de police avec des nouveaux outils qui travaillent ensemble en collaboration avec les autorités provinciales pour préventer une autre blockade une autre interruption de l'économie et une autre interruption pour l'emploiement des Canadiens et des Canadiennes. Ça, c'est une des raisons que le gouvernement a introduit cette loi spéciale. Et maintenant, je vais passer la parole à M. Lametti.
Merci Marco. Merci Christian. Donc, je vais ajouter seulement que comme vous avez vu, comme nous avons vu, comme nous avons constaté, ce sont des occupations très bien organisées, financées de l'étranger et très fluides, très agiles et donc très capables de s'organiser très vite n'importe où. Et donc, ce qu'on veut faire, c'est comme M. Mendicino vient de dire, on veut prévenir d'autres occasions. On a entendu des rumeurs à droite et à gauche, et donc on veut être là justement pour prévenir d'autres situations. Merci.
En suivi, si on dit que ce n'est plus des manifestations, que c'est une occupation, si on dit que, bon, on ne bloque plus les postes frontières, mais que si on dit que c'est un groupe, tout ça c'est le fruit d'un petit groupe d'extrémisme qui agit de façon coordonnée, est-ce que vous êtes prêt aujourd'hui à appeler ça, quoi, je ne sais pas, une insurrection financée par des fonds étrangers? Sinon, pourquoi?
Nous avons pris les mesures que nous avons prises, c'est-à-dire la loi sur les mesures d'urgence, justement pour donner des outils aux forces policières à travers le Canada pour combattre l'organisation, le financement, ainsi que les occupations elles-mêmes. On va continuer dans ce sens. On va laisser, en tant que gouvernement, on va laisser les forces policières faire leur boulot et on va leur donner des outils justement pour réussir.
Merci, M. Mendocino. Est-ce que c'est une insurrection selon vous?
Non, je suis tout en accord avec le ministre Lametti et pour ajouter très rapidement qu'il y a un équilibre dans la déclaration entre les besoins de la création de ces nouveaux outils et en même temps pour protéger tous les droits qui sont dans la charte.
Micro 2.
Bonjour, Antoine Trépanier du journal Le Droit. Le gouvernement du Québec ne veut pas l'application de la loi sur les mesures d'urgence sur son territoire. Toutefois, il y a des manifestants qui sont du côté de Gatineau depuis le début, qui appuient ouvertement le mouvement ici à Ottawa. Est-ce que vous allez l'appliquer au Québec, à Gatineau?
OK. Premièrement, il faut dire encore une fois que cette nouvelle loi n'est pas la même loi qui était en place dans 1970. C'est une loi différente. C'est une loi qui a beaucoup plus de focus pour la création des outils qui peuvent aider les services, les forces policières. Ce n'est pas une loi avec un focus sur les militaires. Donc, ça, c'est un précis qui est très, très important. Et comme M. Lametti et même moi a déjà dit, ici, dans la déclaration, il y a plusieurs des autorités qui est temporaire, qui est cible et qui travaillent ensemble avec les autorités provinciales. Donc, il y a une capacité pour travailler en étroite collaboration avec les provinces qui en ont besoin. Et ça, c'est les façons qu'on va continuer de travailler. Et maintenant, je vais passer la parole à M. Lametti.
Merci pour la question. C'est une question très importante. Évidemment, ce qu'on est en train de faire, comme M. Mendicino vient de nous dire, c'est de donner les outils aux forces policières. Au Québec, la SQ, les forces policières du Gatineau. Ceci dit, et évidemment, on va les appuyer. On a donné des outils et nous avons des ressources. La GRC a des ressources, mais on ne déplace pas la juridiction de la SQ ou de les forces policières de Gatineau. Je sais que jusqu'ici, la situation au Québec est allée assez bien. Vous venez de citer la situation à Gatineau. On est tous au courant. Je sais que M. Legault est au courant aussi. Mais comme je viens de répondre à une autre question, on veut aussi prévenir que la situation sur le terrain se détériore. Et donc, on veut vraiment travailler ensemble avec des mesures ciblées avec des mesures temporaires et des mesures équilibrées et raisonnables.
En relance, les gens à l'extérieur n'ont pas l'intention de bouger. Il y a des gens qui déchiraient l'avis qui leur a été remis ce matin. Votre seuil de tolérance est où exactement au gouvernement fédéral? Est-ce que vous avez émis ou vous avez en tête une date butoir où ces gens-là doivent être partis, que ce soit par la force ou bien de façon pacifique? Est-ce que vous avez un deadline?
Je laisse la question à mes collègues d'ordre public. Sécurité publique.
Mais écoute, la situation en Ottawa est inacceptable pour les habitants ici. C'est très difficile, c'est très dur. Les gens ne peuvent pas attendre leurs emplois. Les familles ne peuvent pas bouger hors de chez eux. C'est un moment très difficile et ils demandent pour l'action concrète. Parce que c'est 3 semaines. C'est 3 semaines assez difficiles pour eux. Donc, ça, c'est une des raisons que nous vient d'introduire cette loi. C'est une situation unique. C'est une situation où il y a un organisme qui a la capacité pour créer des perturbations significatives dans les communautés. Et de notre côté, de le côté du gouvernement, on peut exercer toutes nos énergies, tous nos focus dans la création de ces nouveaux outils pour aider, pour appuyer les forces de police pour faire leur job.
Boris?
Boris, pour le devoir, est-ce que les manifestations ou l'occupation d'Ottawa sera encore devant le Parlement lundi prochain?
J'espère non. J'espère que tout le monde quitte maintenant. Hier, écoute, pour les gens d'Ottawa, ça suffit. Ça suffit. Mais en même temps, il faut laisser le job à les forces policières. Ça, c'est la façon dont notre démocratie fonctionne. Ce n'est pas le job de le gouvernement pour enforcer les lois. C'est le job des policières. Mais on avait créé de nouveaux outils dans la déclaration, dans les ordres, pour aider les services des policières. Et en espérant que ça va accélérer le progrès.
Vous avez parlé, M. Blair, du financement étranger de ces convois. Est-ce que, selon vous, il y a des États, des pays étrangers qui financent ce convoi?
Oui, tout le monde a partagé les inquiétudes de la source financière pour cet organisme qui avait une relation avec les blockades illégales. Nous avons regardé les nouvelles que GoFundMe a arrêté les contributions. C'est une bonne chose. Et avec la déclaration, maintenant, il y a un nouveau pouvoir pour aider les institutions financières, même les polices, pour arrêter s'il y a des inquiétudes de la source des contributions et les intentions, comment ces contributions peuvent aider les blockades. Donc, ça, c'est une des raisons que ce pouvoir a été inclus dans les ordres de la loi des circonstances d'urgence. Il y a des pays, des gouvernements étrangers? On avait des lois très, très fortes pour prendre d'action où c'est nécessaire.
We'll take 3 questions on Zoom. David Akins, you can go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Just, I guess the first question is, you keep speaking about these illegal blockades, plural. There's only one. It's outside. All the others were resolved without the Emergencies Act by really good law enforcement. The one in Surrey, the one in Emerson, the one in Windsor. It was good law enforcement under existing laws. Can you explain what is the specific tool that the folks in Ottawa needed that will finally get them to enforce a friggin' law? Pardon my language.
I think we can forgive you for a little bit of color in your language, David. I think we're all feeling it. And the short answer is that while we've made progress, it's not guaranteed. You're quite right that, yes, we've seen the illegal blockades come down in Coutts, in Surrey, in Windsor. and hopefully later today in Emerson. And while that's not for certain, there are many positive indications that Emerson will be fully opened as well. And all of the positive impacts that flows on the economy, on people's jobs, their job security, their ability to earn a paycheck, as I said in my remarks, to go out, to put food on the table, to look after their children, to look after their parents, for seniors to be able to go about their lives, getting access to public transportation, access to health care. All of the indications right now are encouraging, but they're not guaranteed. And certainly here, if you live in Ottawa, you are waiting with bated breath now for quite some time. In fact, many people are long past the point of patience. And one of the real concerns that I have is that if we don't see a resolution to this, more and more people who live in Ottawa may feel obliged to take matters into their own hands. And that would be a dangerous thing to do. We've seen it in some of the counter-protests where frustration is beginning to boil over, where people who live here feel completely helpless and abandoned. And we have to turn that around. We have to turn that around, and that's one of the reasons why we introduced the Emergencies Act. It was a unique, unprecedented thing to do, but we took the decision carefully. We took the decision deliberately to ensure that law enforcement and existing authorities could work in concert with these new powers to put an end to the blockades. And so, in spite of the progress that we've made, we have to hold that progress. We have to keep our borders open. We have to keep our economy going. We have to keep Canadians at work. We have to allow the people of Ottawa to get their lives back. And we're going to work around the clock to do that. But understand that that work has to be undertaken by police. The people that put on the uniform, the badge, the people that we trust to keep us safe. And I can think of no better person than to add a little bit more context to that than somebody who's worn the badge and the uniform for many, many years. Bill?
Yeah, thanks very much. And David, as we did in our remarks, let me acknowledge the excellent work that was done by the RCMP, for example, in Coutts, Alberta. But let us also acknowledge that that blockade at Coutts, Alberta went on for 2 weeks. And throughout that 2 weeks, there was hugely impactful on the people of Alberta and on Canadians' interests. The blockade at Emerson has gone on for several days. The blockade at Windsor lasted several days, and it forced some of our auto plants to be idled, and it was very clear that it was enormously challenging for law enforcement using their existing authorities to have the positive effect of reopening our borders. Now, the RCMP in Coutts, Alberta, took extraordinary and important enforcement action yesterday, for which we are all grateful. And they revealed to us something about the nature of these types of blockades, what their scope is and what their intent is. You know, and I've spent many years investigating organized crime, and I'll tell you, one of the ways in which we really determined the nature of the threat and its motivation was to follow the money. And unfortunately, for these protests and these blockades, these illegal blockades, law enforcement did not have the tools they required to follow the money. And it's also important that the money be in jeopardy, that if people know that there are going to be financial consequences for their illegal activities. And I would note that even after the law enforcement action at Coutts, people were arrested and taken away, but the trucks were still there until we announced our intention to bring forward measures where we were going to bring greater scrutiny to the financing of these illegal operations and real consequences for the people that were engaged in them, that they packed up and went home. Similarly, there was no enforcement of the law at Emerson, but that caused those people to leave. It was the certainty that there were going to be real consequences, financial consequences and legal consequences arising from the measures we introduced. And finally, after we saw the damage that was done to the Canadian economy, to Canadian interests, to our international reputation, to the industries that rely so much on the movement of essential goods and supplies and auto parts coming back and forth across that border each and every day. It was very clear that the people that organized those blockades knew exactly who they were harming and what they were doing. And there is no guarantee that they couldn't set up again within hours. We've already seen them make efforts at other border crossings. But with the imposition of these new measures, we have not only taken action to open those ports of entry that were blockaded, but to protect all ports of entry, to protect all Canadian interests from the criminal intent of the people behind these blockades. Thanks.
Thanks very much, gents. And you'll be pleased to know that about 15 minutes ago, RCMP Manitoba just tweeted that Route 75 is open, all traffic is moving across the border.
You ought to double as a traffic reporter, David, so waiting.
Here you go. Just a quick one, and I guess this is Minister Mendicino, it might be Minister, but I'm not sure. An operational question. Since invoking the Emergencies Act, and specifically on the financial controls, can you tell us how many bank accounts have been frozen, how much money has been frozen? Can you give us an update on what is actually happening to people's corporate or bank accounts or insurance?
Well, what I think we can say with confidence is that those authorities are now in force and that they are being used. And it is incredibly important that, that we follow the money, that authorities have the capacity to follow the money, because for a number of weeks there have been many alarm bells that have been going off about the rate at which the leaders of the blockades have been able to raise significant funds, much of which has been raised from abroad. And so with those flags, it is important that through the Emergencies Act that police have these tools, that banks have these tools, and not just through conventional currency, but I think more relevantly, we're seeing alternative platforms like cryptocurrencies being used as a vehicle to fund the efforts that are going on to harm Canadians and to hurt Canadians. And so when it comes to the precise details of how many individuals' accounts have been impacted by this law, or where from and who, at the same time, David, you'll appreciate that we have to respect the boundaries of investigation and operational independence. And I keep making this point, and I'm going to keep making it so that you, your readers, and all Canadians understand. The role of government is to write the laws and to provide the tools and the resources that police need. But it is up to police to then use those tools to end the blockades and to restore public order. And that's the way our democracy functions, and for good reason. You don't want the folks who are elected to become sort of political extensions of enforcement that can lead to very troubling and dangerous results. And I know that's not what you're suggesting, but it's very important that folks understand exactly where those boundaries and where those bright lines exist. And it's part of our job to make sure that we respect them.
And I'd like to remind everybody that we have a definite timeout at 2:05. So next question will be Mary Kay Walsh. Mary Kay, you can go ahead with your question.
It's actually Alex Ballinger from the Star here. You guys just unmuted me. I don't know if I can. Am I jumping the queue here? Or
We hear you.
Okay, I'll just give her. Minister Mendicino, you mentioned that there's these ties with a far right group between what happened in Coutts and what's going on in Ottawa. Can you explain exactly what group you're talking about? How big is it? How much of a threat is this to people's safety? We saw a bunch of guns and body armor in Coutts. Are you concerned there's similar items in Ottawa? Just please expand on what you said, because that was quite striking.
Well, I think we're beginning to see, what we're beginning to see emerge now are the hallmarks of a sophisticated and capable organization of a small number of individuals, but with a steel resolve, driven by an extreme ideology that would seek to overthrow the existing government and create some kind of parallel structure whereby they get to dictate the rules based on untrammeled freedoms. And it may sound far out there in left field, but looking back over the course of the last number of weeks, and more importantly, seeing the developments of the arrests and seizures that have been made this past week, there's a real danger in trivializing and diminishing exactly what's going on here. And we have good reason to be concerned about that, as Canadians do. When we go to our borders and we can't, get by because people have armed themselves with the kind of illegal firearms and other weapons to use with force against our authorities, that is extremely concerning. And likewise, what we've seen in Ottawa is in some ways even more complicated because the people that are participating and that are driving the occupation here have become entrenched. So much so that at times on Wellington it has appeared to be completely lawless. And so that is another reason why we've introduced the Emergencies Act, which is to create the additional tools that are necessary, as you've heard colleagues explain, to give to the police and to other institutions to restore our public order. And as time goes on, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer what exactly is motivating this group. It is not about vaccines. It is not about vaccine mandates. It's not about having a robust debate about how to get out of the pandemic. Canadians have those discussions and those disagreements all the time. We talk about it at my dining room table and kitchen table just like everybody else does. But that's completely different than the kind of behavior and the kind of, frankly, disturbing criminal conduct that we're seeing in Coutts, in Emerson, in Surrey, and in Windsor, and yes, here in Ottawa. And so we just have to be very clear-eyed about exactly what this group is trying to advance, and more importantly, why they're trying to advance it.
Just as a follow-up to that, I mean, you talked about the individuals of Coutts have strong ties to a far-right extreme organization with leaders who are in Ottawa. Are you talking about the leaders of the Convoy who sometimes hold press conferences, who we've seen on social media talking about fundraising? Who exactly are you talking about? Does the group have a name? What is this far-right organization with ties between Coutts and the leaders in Ottawa?
Alex, those are very good. Alex, those are very good questions for law enforcement and for police. All I can tell you is that what we're seeing is a very similar pattern of conduct and the hallmarks of the ideology and the motivations of people who are operating in different parts of the country, who are trying to interrupt our borders, who are interrupting daily life here in our communities. They use similar rhetoric. They use similar rallying calls. One only has to turn to social media. But in terms of the details, which I think you are quite right to ask, those are questions which are best put to our law enforcement.
Mary Kay, you can now ask your question.
Can you please clarify, yes or no, have you seen clear or been given or told clear evidence of a direct tie between the people who had the guns and the motives and plans to kill officers in Alberta and people who are in the demonstrations and blockades in Ottawa?
The charges that have been laid in Coutts will lay out exactly what it is that the police believe and hope to prove in a court of law. The point that is being made is that the rhetoric that supported the movement in Coutts is very similar and strikingly similar to the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing not only in Ottawa but right across the country. And it sheds light on the ideology that is motivating the small number of organized individuals who are trying to spread that message, and certainly are doing it in a very effective way across social media as a means of undermining public confidence in our institutions, including in law enforcement and in government. And that is something that should all concern us when it comes to what exactly it is that we are confronting here. And one only has to take a look at the impact that it has had in our communities. And I've talked about it, but this is about really being quite clear-eyed about what's driving the movement.
Okay, so my takeaway from that is that you are making a link in the rhetoric, but you have not actually seen anything that actually confirms a connection. If that's incorrect, please let me know. But I have a follow-up question for my colleague, Bill Curry. If the government is so certain in its use of the Emergencies Act, Why are you not committing to having a vote in a minority parliament this week to ensure you have the support of the House of Commons for that?
I'm going to pass that important question to Minister Lametti on process.
Thank you. Thank you for that supplemental question. We are going to follow every single rule that we need to follow with respect to the use of the Emergencies Act, because they contain important safeguards. So we are going to debate it in the House, and we are going to have a vote in the House.
But when will the vote be?
I'll leave that up to the House leaders. As I said, it's going to the debate will we think the debate will begin imminently. I'll leave it up to the House leaders to determine how long that debate goes. It has to be started within 7 days. We'll be well within that, and we intend to debate this openly, transparently, and according to the checks and balances that are set out in the Act. That's one of the reasons why we chose this Act.
We have time for one last question in the room, Kevin.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Minister Mendicino, I want to follow up on Marika Walsh's question. I think that we need to be certain that it sounds like you are making the connection between the rhetoric of suspects who, are accused of attempted and conspiring to attempt murder in Coutts, Alberta, and the organizers here. So is that what your conclusion is, or is that something that's backed up by evidence of an ongoing law enforcement investigation?
No, I think you have it right. I mean, I think the pattern that we're seeing here is in the rhetoric that is being used not only in Coutts, not only in Ottawa, but right across the country. And, one, I think, can observe that very plainly in the similar messages that are being shared by those who are participating actively in the blockades. And so that unified and focused message is one of concern, and I think does shed light on the ideological motivations of those who are prepared to move beyond just demonstrations and crossing into different conduct which would be illegal.
So then it's your conclusion.
It's certainly, I think, the conclusion of many individuals and Canadians who are taking a look at social media, and it's extremely concerning.
And I'm told this is all the time we have.
Sorry, I know that was a fault anyways. For the financing, how long can this last? I mean, if you suspend someone's account, banks are concerned that they're going to be put up to other legal challenges, legal barriers. If they're suspending accounts, what kind of legal accountability does that mean for major financial institutions? How long can that last? Can it be suspended indefinitely? I think there's a lot of questions that Canadians have.
I'll turn that over to Minister Lametti on process.
No, I think you got it.
Thank you for the question. Look, the law is enforced for 30 days. It's temporary. You've seen that order that has been promulgated with respect to the financial rules. The financial institutions will work with law enforcement authorities to provide the information that then law enforcement authorities will use, and we will abide by the parameters of the law within that. And so if the law only is enacted for 30 days unless it's extended. And as we have said, we hope that we'll revoke it well before that.
Thank you very much. This concludes the press conference.
Thank you. The conference has now ended.